Alright, so let's now create those new users based on the model that we just implemented in the last video. So we will do most of the user-related stuff like creating new users, logging users in, or updating passwords in the authentication controller. Okay? So all of this stuff that's related to authentication really is not going to be in the user controller that we actually created before, but instead we will create an authentication controller. Okay? So all the functions that are related to authentication will go here. Okay? And this will make a bit more sense later on when we then start using all the functions that I'm going to put in here. Okay? And now the first thing that we need to do is to import our user. So our user model, of course, and that is at one level up. Then it should be in models and then user model. All right. So let's create and export our very first controller. And I'm going to call this one sign up. All right. And so you see that I'm not calling it create user like I did in a tour controller, but really I'm calling it sign up because that's the name that has a bit more meaning in the context of authentication. All right. So it's going to be an async function, of course, because we're going to do some database operations. Then request, response, and next, as always. And then in here is where we create the new user. And so that's very similar to what we did before. So this time it's called new user. And then remember how we create a new document based on a model. So we use the model name, of course, which in this case is user. And then on that, we use the create method. Okay? And then all we need to do is to pass in an object with the data from which the user should be created, right? And so just like before, that data is actually in request.body, okay? And so all of this is going to return a promise, and so we need to await that. And so that's the reason why this is an async function, all right? And I see that up here, we need exports, okay? And now in the next step, we will then actually send that new user to the client. So res.status, which is 201 for created, and then our JSON object. So that is success again. And then our data property, which is again called an envelope here. So a property that is going to contain the data itself. And that data is now called user, when before it was called tour, right? And so what we're going to send in here is the new user. Okay? Give it a save. And before we try this out, remember that this is an async function. And so we need to think about error handling here, right? So what do we need to do here? Well, we need to wrap this entire function that we just created into the catch async function that we created in the last section, right? So remember how we did that in the tour controller, where all of the functions that are asynchronous are wrapped into this catch async function so that we don't have to write the try catch block in each and every function here, right? Remember that from the last section? So actually I'm going to go ahead and copy this require statement here, okay? So a bit lazy sometimes, not feel like writing the same code over and over again. So catch async, and then we need to close that down right here in the end. Okay, and now all we need to do is to actually implement the route so that this sign up handler here then can get called. And so let's go to our user route, which we actually already created some time before, and we already have some routes in here. Okay, but actually I'm going to create a new one here now. And as I mentioned right in the beginning of this video, the user resource is a bit different from all the other resources. Again, because it really has to do with all things authentication. And so we have a different controller for that. So the auth controller the function names also have some different names, and so we will actually also have a special route. Okay, so let's say router.post, and then we will create a route for sign up, so /sign up, and then this is where we will use that function that we just created before. Okay, and of course, before we can do that, we need to require that authentication controller. All right, so let's just duplicate this line here and replace user in 2 places. And so here we have our auth controller. And so let's now use that. .sign up. All right. So as you see, this sign up is really kind of a special endpoint. It doesn't fit the REST architecture that we talked about before, because in this case, it doesn't make much sense. And so remember how we said that in some special cases, we of course can create other endpoints that do not 100% fit that REST philosophy that is basically implemented here. Okay, so this here of course follows 100% the REST philosophy, where the name of the URL has nothing to do with the action that is actually performed. While up here, of course, it has. So the name of the route is sign up because we are signing up users. Okay, and also down here we have implemented all of these different HTTP verbs, right? But in here for sign up, we only really need post. Okay, so we cannot really get data from sign up, or we cannot patch a sign up, so not update it. It doesn't really make sense. And so in this case, all we want to do is to have a route for sign up where we can only post data. Okay, because again, it makes only sense to actually send data to this route so that the new user is then created. And we will have different routes similar to this one, like for login or for reset password and all kinds of stuff like that. Okay, and we will also keep these routes here, okay, so the ones in a more REST format, because there's also the possibility of a system administrator updating or deleting or getting all the users based on their ID, right? But we will take care of that later. For now, we just want to implement all the functions that are about authentication. So basically functions that are only relevant for the user itself. So it's not an admin that is going to sign up a user, or it's not an admin that's going to log in a user, but instead it's the own user that's going to sign up himself or log in himself. Okay, does that make sense? So we should have everything in place now so that it should now work when we create our new user. So when we sign up basically for our application. So let's try that now. So let's just copy this URL. Users, and then sign up, right? Then we need to specify the body. We say raw and then JSON, okay? Oh, and also don't forget, of course, to set this one to post, all right? So what data do we need here? Remember, first one is the name, then the email, and I'm putting my own here actually. All right. Then the password, and let's just do something here. It doesn't really matter. Okay, and again, we're going to talk about password management a bit later, and actually right in the next video. So now this one here should be the same. So pass 1, 2, 3, 4, just as a test. All right, and the photo, remember, is not required, and so I'm not doing that. And so let's see now. And now we get this error here, and that's because I misspelled password here. Okay, so that would be the German way of writing it. And now it's right. Okay, and indeed, we get our new user here. Perfect. Now, let's say that we tried to do this with a get. What would we get? Well, this route is not yet defined, which is because we actually already kind of defined this route here. So basically this part here of the route. So let me quickly show you that. So it's not in the Tor controller, but in the user controller. So basically we have get user here, and then this route is not yet defined. Okay, and so that's the one that we're getting. But of course, we're not really interested in that. Okay, and let's now go ahead and save this here to Postman so that we can then easily reuse it. So sign up. Okay, and now just to quickly confirm, let's actually open it in Compass here as well. And you see that at this point we only have tours. And so let's go here to Naders, try to reload this. And that's probably up here. And so indeed, now we get our users collection here. So let's open that up. And indeed, we now get our first document here. So the user that we just created. Now in here, you can see the plain password. And so, of course, that is not ideal. And of course, that is not ideal. So in a web application, passwords should never, never, ever be stored as plain in a database. All right. So there's a lot of password management that needs to go on behind the scenes. And so that is exactly what we will do in the next video.